When we feel different from those around us, we often doubt ourselves and question our own legitimacy. But each of us, regardless of our titles, has more power than we think we do. This week, I talk with my friend and fellow coach, Meenakshi Iyer, about her story growing up in different parts of India and always feeling different from those around her. We also talk about how these experiences have influenced her views on leadership and how we can all benefit from focusing on self-leadership and embracing our personal power. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Meenakshi. I am so excited for us to have this conversation. You and I have been chatting for a bit now, and we're transitioning into chatting in front of a listening audience, and I can't wait to continue the discussion. Before we do so, though, I would love to invite you to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, Kim. And I know we both know we could talk for hours on end. So I'm really looking forward to sharing our conversation with your audience. It's lovely to be here. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm physically located in Virginia in the US. And I like to describe myself as someone who thrives at the intersection of people, process, and technology. I have a portfolio career that's indicative of that. And I started in healthcare in India right out of college and went on to working in IT and IT services companies, and picked up teaching English to speakers of other languages as a skill, and did that for a few years before moving to the US 15 years ago now. And as an accompanying spouse. So my husband was transferred on his job, and that's what brought me to the US. So I've worked in many industries, hospitality, healthcare, IT services, and health tech for the last, I want to say about definitely 10 plus years since I moved to the US. I went back to healthcare, it just happened, and I've been in the healthcare technology space ever since. And in my 25-year career, I have worked not only in different industries, but also worked in different roles, up and down all levels of hierarchy, and worked in startups, and had the privilege of setting up businesses and working alongside business owners. And I think that's contributed to the sort of systemic view I hold on most things. And in the last 4 years, ever since I started NorthStar Solutions and Services, which is a boutique, future work-oriented coaching, training, and consulting practice, and it's a virtual practice, so I'm able to connect with people from around the world. I serve as a personal agility, self-leadership, and change leadership coach, and I focus on mid-career technology leaders, women in technology, and folks like me who speak English as an additional language, because our lived experience in the world of work, predominantly, which is predominantly English speaking for a good part, is very different. And there's a lot of code switching that we do, and it doesn't get talked about much. So our experiences in the workplace are very different. And so that's the sort of segment of the professional community that I focus on. And I also partner with small to mid-sized companies that are looking to transform their ways of working and adopt agile ways of working. My goal is really to help individuals and teams and organizations to make human skills such as agility, collaboration, and inclusion and belonging a daily practice. It doesn't need to be siloed under HR or under DEI, but how all leaders at all levels can actually adopt these as individual and team practices. So that's what I'm focused on, and that's what I do currently. And it's through the coaching journey that you and I met as well. So it's like full circle, this conversation.
Exactly. And I'm just thinking about your introduction as this like bright, shiny apple. And I'm like, which bite do I take first? Right? There's so much to what you said. And I think I want to start with, if we go back to what you were talking about when you were talking about people who are speaking English as an additional language. I really want to talk about sort of, you bring a very global perspective. You've had a lot of international experience. And, you know, when we talk about imposter syndrome, one of the triggers of imposter syndrome is feeling different from
Yes.
the majority culture around you. And can you say more about what you know to be particular challenges of that experience today in the workplace of, you know, somebody who is a non-native English speaker, comes here as an immigrant, is trying to navigate a different cultural experience? It's like, what has that been like for you, and maybe from what you've learned from others too?
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot, a lot to unpack because, you know, in India, I mean, I'm originally from India, and I was my my ancestry is in the south of India, and but because of my father's job, it took him to different parts of the country, and I ended up spending the first my formative years until from the age of like I don't know 18 months all the way up to 13 years in the north of the country in India. So so anybody that's familiar with India will know that almost every state has its own language, you know, with its own script. So if you cross state lines, you will start seeing a different language, and you will start hearing a different language, and that's the norm for us. If you're in India, if you're from India, that's natural to have that kind of diversity in all respects, right? So it's culture, it's food, language, it's ways of being, ways of doing. Everything is different, and that's just a part of it. So that's what I grew up with. However, at the same time, I also remember being singled out as a child for being from the South. Right? So I was always referred to as the South Indian or the Madrasi, as people would say there. So anybody, this Madras is modern day, it's called Chennai, but Madras is the capital of one of the states in the South. And generally people would refer to say as Madrasi. It didn't matter where you came from, which of the 4 or 5 states you came from, you were a Madrasi if you were below a certain, I don't know what line we had in India, but if you're from the South, you're a Madrasi. And for all the South Indians, anybody that came from the north, which is any outside of any of those 4 southern states, was a Punjabi. Punjab is one state in the north, but you would refer to. So this is, you know, uh, this is what I grew up with. So I was always acutely aware of being different. How may and why I may not have understood that as a child, but then that was my lived experience. And then when we came back to the South, to actually our ancestral town, which is where my father chose to spend the last, he wanted to come back before he retired, so he wanted to settle in there. And it was one of the hardest transitions of my life. I remember that. And it also fractured my relationship with him, because I felt like I was being uprooted for no fault of mine. Because although I was South Indian growing up in the North, I still had that lived experience of being in the North, and I never thought that is going to change. So it really felt like the ground and the earth underneath me was gone, right? And nobody prepared me for that. So I think it was my first sort of traumatic experience, if you will, of that move, and it was the late 80s, early 90s when we moved, and then when I came back to the South, I obviously didn't speak the language as well, as fluently as everybody did, and I was the visitor, right? So I was the Punjabi who was in the midst of them, who had a Madrasi name. So what do we do with you, right? So I think I've always had that experience, and which is why I talk about I have been this proverbial outsider all my life. And so I'm constantly looking for social cues from others to inform my behavior in social interactions. And I think that actually helped me as an immigrant here in the US, because I walk in and I'm observing. I observe first. I'm not the first person to say much, but then I'll observe to understand what's what, and then I figure out my way of interaction with the group. So, speaking of imposter syndrome, I think the way I see it is that, in my experience, having always been in a place where I am sort of the minority, if you will, for whatever reason, it may be because I didn't speak the local language as well as well as everybody else, or the color of my skin, my name. So, right. So in India, we also have a caste system, and so from a caste perspective, I sit at the top of the hierarchy because of the caste I was born into, and people can find that out with my last name. And but I'm a woman, but I'm fair skinned relative to everyone else in southern India, for example. So there's all these questions, right? So people look at my name and they hear me talk. There's a lot of confusion. Like, where are you from, really? So I've experienced that even within India. So I feel like it's sort of normalized here to have that reaction from people here in the US, because after all, I'm a foreigner. So I think I take that. I'm very even keeled with that reaction here in the US because I've experienced so much of it all my life in India. And so it has affected my confidence and how I feel about myself and how confident I feel in my knowledge, skills, and abilities, I think, throughout my life. But what got me through is that I had a strong foundation, thanks to my parents, on the academic side. So it's my straight A tendencies that got me through. So I think I really, very early on, I learned that the way to success is my own competence, and I'll do everything that I need to do to build my competence, because that's where I got my confidence from, and that's true till this day. So that's been a bit of my sort of origin story, if you will.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know some of it, but just hearing you talk, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that part. Right. So I always learn something new from our conversations. And I want to bring into the conversation a couple of other points, because as I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking that there are the likelihood of sort of two parallel responses, or I'm trying to think, for lack of a better term, of like logical outcomes of your experience, right? On the one hand, I can imagine some resilience, right? Because you have been doing this for so much of your life that some sense, while it doesn't make it easier, you're building some muscles along the way. On the other hand, I can also imagine it feeling almost like cumulative trauma in a sense, right? Like, because you're being subjected to this kind of experience over and over again. And so I wonder how that feels to you. And then when it makes sense to do so, I want to introduce agility into this conversation, because I think that's such a big part of what you think about. And when I was working in high tech, we talked about Agile and agility in the context of the work, right? Yeah. And I love the way you talk about it in terms of the person. And so I want to hear your perspective on that too.
Absolutely. And very well said. You're absolutely right. I think my experiences have given me grit and resilience, and they've also given me a lot of courage. So I would try anything at least once, anything legal at least once. That's my joke, but it's true. I think I would give anything a shot, and how that has helped me is, I'm a natural at connecting people and ideas. Especially and making sure that it leads to some meaningful action, right? So I'm always about connecting dots, and that has served me well in my professional life. It's also served me well in my personal life, and I also listen for what's not said, because I'm so used to reading social cues that I spend a lot of time in really watching people and listening to everything that's not being said, and including body language. And because in my professional life, I spent a considerable amount of time working with people in virtual teams, long before this was a thing. And I want to make a sidebar here, by the way, because when you talk about imposter syndrome, your location of work and like your physical location and how your teams are located and where it defines the level of access you have with your leadership or with your colleagues and things like that. There is so much that's been talked about in the last 3-4 years, ever since the pandemic, about, oh my God, virtual work and remote and hybrid. So anybody that comes from the world of software development will know that hybrid work and virtual work and remote work, whatever label you want to put, is at least 30 to 35 years old. Anybody that has done any work in software outsourcing will know this. And this was pre-technology. The best technology you probably had was Skype. We used to do conference calls, right? So you don't see anybody. There's this big box in the conference room and everybody's talking around it. We still do that. So the reason I'm saying this is, it's just because a lot more people have been forced to work that way, it does not make it new. And the other part of this is that in the software industry, when the reason why outsourcing became a thing was from a cost saving perspective, right? So a lot of these challenges around the human connection and how much that is required for successful work to happen, the consideration around that is new, but the experience is not. Right? And so coming back to what you asked me about, so my experience of having to always either explain myself or read what's happening around the room, and my own experience with the software outsourcing world has really put me in a position where I'm a good listener, and I look for what's not being said, and I can build relationships even completely virtually, and even through phone calls, like even without seeing the other person, because I'm so tuned to listening for the pauses, for the hesitation. And those are all symptoms of what's happening within the person as they're having their conversation. And now as I look back, it serves me so well as a professional coach, because these are some of the skills that I've been using. These are, now competency markers for a coach, but then I've been honing these skills for years, and they've helped me. The second part to that, what you said is, on a personal level, I've reached a level of exhaustion now, because I have to constantly explain myself, either verbally about my background and then claim my spot at the table, so to speak, or I get this experience that, yeah, I might be here, but does not mean I'm welcome just because of how I look or how I speak or whatever it may be, right? I might be included, but I'm still not welcome. I'm just being included. So inclusion has so many nuances. And so personally, it's becoming a little bit tiring for me, right? Right from teaching people how to pronounce my name, I'm like, come on, do some homework, right? And especially in today's times when most of us have a LinkedIn profile. Like, did you take the time to go to my LinkedIn profile? Did you see that little speaker icon? Click that. I actually tell you how to pronounce my name, right? So I feel like if I have to be the one always walking that extra mile to reach the other person, yes, I've done it, but then, oh my God, I've done it for like 30 years. Now give me a break. So that part is exhausting. And I think I've made a journey in that, in the sense that I have learned to not let that affect my confidence. Because it does affect my confidence. I mean, as recent as a few months ago, like 2 months ago, I went to my first in-person networking event in, I don't know, God knows, like 3-4 years. It was a local event that I went to. And I found that I was the only person that looked like me in the room. And then I found one more Indian person. But I found that and maybe I'm reading too much into this, I don't know. But what I experienced was people struggling to figure out how to interact with me. Because I noticed other folks, the conversations seemed to flow much more easily than with me. And that nobody approached me to have a conversation. It was a networking event, for God's sake. Right? So then I'm like, oh, here we go. I have to now go reach out and open my mouth and say something so people know that I can speak English and I can speak it intelligibly. So, and then I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? Right? And then that's one of the more recent times when I felt that sense of exhaustion coming over. And so I had to think about it. I'm like, okay, why am I here? What am I doing? I'm a solopreneur. I am also looking to build my business. So I need to get over this. So there's all these different conversations, monologues that I'm having. And at the same time, it's like, okay, maybe this is not the way to do this for me. Maybe this is not serving me, and I'm not going to engage with this anymore. Right? So that self-doubt then comes in, and then that starts affecting my confidence. And then I'm like, okay, I don't even have my 30-second elevator pitch down. Like, what is wrong with me? Then I go down that path, right? Because people don't always have the time to listen to your whole story. I love stories. I love origin stories particularly, right? That doesn't mean that that's what is commonly accepted. So that's been my experience. Like, yes, it's given me grit, resilience, and courage, and I'll keep at it. That's what enables me to be consistent. Right? And as a solopreneur, you've heard this, Kim, before. My joke is, yeah, I'm going to keep making noise, and one day I'm going to make some money. So I keep showing up. Because if nothing, I have like this library of content that I can monetize one day.
Well, can I ask you a question about this? Because I think this is really important for people listening too, because women of color in particular have a very challenging experience in the workplace related to a lot of what you just described. And it might be for different reasons, right? Different dimensions of identity. But the exhaustion is what really jumps out at me. And there's a big difference between saying, I'm not going to let it get to me, and actually physically and emotionally rising above it, which can be so hard to do. I mean, we're human, right? We are biologically wired to respond to our environment. And so it's almost impossible to get to a level where you just sort of don't let that reach you anymore. So what are there things that you have found to be helpful? Like, do you actually use certain tools or resources to help you when you are feeling that way?
One thing, I didn't have language for it, and I think it came up in one of our conversations in Leading Humans in the Thursday group with you, Kim. And I don't know if it was you or someone in the group that said, be kind because that's who you are and not for the other person. I didn't have that language, but that's what I do. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. Now I have it codified, But that's what I had to remind myself. I'm like, okay, am I going to react or respond? And so there's a couple of things that I think about. One is, and I think over the years I've become good at not being at tables where respect is not being served. And I know that's a quote. And I do that. I've started doing that. I just walk away. I would rather be by myself, sit at a table. It might be like this round table meant for 10, and I'm just going to go sit there by myself, and I'm fine with it. And it's taken me years to get to that point. But that's one thing I do. It's like, if I don't feel respected, if I don't feel included, I finish whatever I'm like, let's say if I'm eating or drinking, I'll finish that and then walk away and then find some other place to go sit. And I've also become very I remind myself that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and that's totally okay. Right? And so I will find, and as I say this, I'm reminded that I also have remind myself that I'm not here to chase people. I have to attract the right kind of people that I want to work with. And I think that's one of the reasons why, after setting up my practice, NorthStar Solutions, I really have made this conscious decision over the last few months to say, I don't think every now and then, I love the security of a paycheck. So every now and then I'll go look for jobs, and I'm like, no, I'm chasing. I'm going to just stop that. And I have to make the way in my life for the right things to come towards me. It's easier said than done, because as I'm saying this, and this is another point that I want to make, is I'm also very acutely aware of all the areas of privilege in my life. I have a spouse that has a steady job that provides us that provides us for everything that we need, materialistically speaking, and it allows me to go do this thing. Right. So being aware of that keeps me grounded. Because I think one of the things that triggers me when I look at others who, like social media is filled with curated lives, right? And then nobody talks about the grunt work that it takes to get there. So being acutely aware of all the privilege that I have in my life, the fact that I can speak English, and that is the language of the world of business and work, that I am actually able to articulate what I do and how I can make sense to bring value to whoever I'm speaking to, right? So these things. So becoming comfortable with being by myself, being alone, not lonely, but being alone, and that's fine. Recognizing that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I'm not here to please everyone. And these things really feed into my self-confidence and how I show up. And I think the third thing is really to protect my own energy. So I've stopped engaging with people and circumstances that rob me of my energy. So I really focus on what is happening inside of me and how am I responding or reacting to a situation or a person, people, event, whatever it may be. And I pay attention to my breathing pattern, what the sensations in different parts of my body, and I've become very aware of that. And the last thing is I take time off when I don't do anything. I've started scheduling idle time in my day to day, and those are times when I don't engage with anything, and really choosing when to respond and if to respond at all, because not responding is a response in itself. So I've stopped feeling the pressure to engage and respond to every single stimulus in my life.
Wow. And so what I'm thinking about as you're sharing that is, and I think this speaks to the concept of self-leadership too, right? Is looking for your personal power, right? And you mentioned the privilege piece being a factor in that, but some of us have more privilege than others. Some of us have more power than others, but we all have some amount of power. And and a lot of times when you're in a situation like you're describing, where you're feeling disrespected, you're feeling singled out, that's not what we're thinking about. We're not recognizing that we actually have ways of responding that are empowering. But I think that's a really important part of this too, is to sort of identify what your options are so that you can show up from the most empowered place.
Absolutely. You're so right. And if I don't respect myself, I'm going to project that, and that's what I'm going to get in return. So if somebody is being disrespectful and there are many ways of showing that, right? Not acknowledging you or having a conversation with you without pronouncing your name. That happens to me a lot. Or completely ignoring you, whatever it may be. If I let that into my energy space, then I am disrespecting myself. That's how I want to look at it now. So if I respect myself enough, I'm going to walk away from that space. or I'm not going to react. That's the way I show that, okay, I got this and this is how I'm going to deal with it. And this is a big part of why I call myself a self-leadership coach. Is a lot of times my clients, they talk about and especially, I work with a lot of rising emerging leaders and mid-career leaders, and they all have seen uh, leadership being modeled within their organizations. And so, like, I remember having this conversation a few weeks ago, and my client was talking about how they see leaders being extroverted, leaders being very clear in communicating, and with the sort of like a confident, commanding voice. And so these are some of the pieces that they have picked up, and their exploration in our conversation was, do I have to? Is that the only way to be a leader? They always they're busy, and it's very difficult to get time with them. But I'm not sure. So I'm like, my question to them was, okay, what is important to you to show up as a leader, as a person? Oh, I want to be able to be available for my people. I want to have these conversations. I'm approachable, but then I'm wondering if I'm a pushover. I'm like, so let's talk about this. So for them, because they have seen these characteristics or traits being modeled out as in the senior leaders within their organization, their whole mental model around leadership is skewed towards that. So I help people figure out what is leadership for them as individuals, and what do they want it to be. What is their leadership stance that is most authentic to who they are? Because I asked this person this question. I said, my client this question. I said, so how would you feel if you were to be like this senior leader in your company? And their response was, how true is that to who you are? Like, what you value? You value human connection. You value being straightforward. You value being approachable. Oh, I want to retain all of that. That was their immediate response, right? So bringing that confidence back into, okay, this is who I am, and this is what works for me, and this is what I'm going to do. A lot of us get caught up in what we see around us, and we think that that is the way to be. And so for me, I have these three constructs of self-leadership that I talk about, and I practice myself, is lead from where you are. Leadership has nothing to do with titles. Leadership is, to me, is, like you said, it's all about personal power. It's not positional power at all. Because positions and titles, somebody gives them to you, and if somebody is giving them to you, they can take it away as well. And that's what the layoffs have taught us. Right. And then you find your entire life shattered because this job's gone. And I've been there. It took me about 3 to 6 months to figure out who I was, because for me, my entire identity was invested in my job. And that the realization that, okay, my work, all these years, 20 plus years, I had built my entire life around my work. And I completely flipped it. And it took me 3 to 6 months to go through that journey to say, work is one way that allows me, it pays my bills, it allows me to live the life I want to live. But what is the life I want to live? Let me figure that out first, and then I'll figure out what I want to do. And I totally understand that it is a point of privilege to do that, because if I still say this, because it was a conversation with my husband, we have bills to pay, we have health insurance, which in this country is unfortunately tied to employment. So I'm not saying make these decisions out there, have them firmly grounded in what your realities are, right? So being aware of what your privileges and what your constraints are, and then figure this out. So I'm not talking about eat, pray, love, chuck your job and go travel the world. It sounds good in books and movies, but so leading from where you are, personal power over positional power. The second thing is lead self before we lead others. A lot of us are trained to be leaders, and the models that we see around us are all about leading others. But what are you doing for yourself? And going back to some of our ancient wisdom that speaks so much to that. And the third thing is leading with your head, heart, and hands. And that's because if there is imbalance in that, and what I mean by that is what you feel and what you think and what you do, they have to be aligned. So you have to align to your values, your core values that you so strongly feel about. And what are your thoughts around it in terms of how you're going to strategize to implement those values in your everyday life? And what are you doing? What are your actions? So these have to be in harmony. And whenever they are not, is when at least I have experienced turmoil. So these are my three core principles around self-leadership.
Oh, I love it. I always love hearing you talk about this, because I think that there is so much, sorry. So there's so much still rooted in these very narrow profiles of leadership that so I think the conversation has shifted, and clearly we have the language to acknowledge that, let's call it diversity of thought, right? And diversity of style is actually a good thing. But in practice, when we look around and we continue to see people who fit a particular model of leadership getting ahead and dominating the power structure, it does cause us to look at ourselves and say, there must be something wrong with me. I should be doing it differently, right? I should be more like him, or I should be more like her. And if we're trying to be someone that we're not, we're never going to bring our full power and confidence and our natural gifts and strengths to the world, right? And so it is challenging, because our organizational cultures and accepted behaviors and norms dictate a lot of what is valued and what is recognized and rewarded. However, this takes me back to what you were talking about, which I think is really good, very literally and theoretically, is like, if I'm at a table where I'm not respected, I'm going to walk away. And maybe we don't have the privilege to be able to do that immediately, because we have we're the breadwinner, or we have kids to feed, or whatever the case may be. But the moment that disrespect happens, it becomes a signal. I think of it as like a data point, right? Like we're sort of building a database of our experience, and we're observing, we're paying attention. And if that data continues to accumulate in that direction, it gives us insight, and it gives us space to think about, okay, well, if I can't be my best self here, then I'm going to go someplace where I can be. And it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but I can at least start to lay the groundwork for that. And I think that's how so much of what you say really comes together for me, and in terms of like, either I'm going to build my personal power and confidence where I am so I can make a bigger impact and do more on the path that I'm on, or I'm going to decide this particular environment is not worthy of me.
Yes.
And I'm going to go someplace else where they see me differently.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this has also come up in one of our conversations, Kim, that women in general tend to internalize what happens in our environment. So if I got let's say, my performance review, and during my performance review, I was given certain feedback that I wasn't expecting, or it was less than desirable, I look for ways to immediately tie it back to something about me. And in women in general, we are given feedback on style more than content. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think we tend to, and this affects our self-confidence, because being laid off, for example, a lot of us, and that's not just women, a lot of us who experience this sort of like an abrupt end to something that we were on, we immediately think about what did we do wrong, and that our self-esteem and self-confidence and conviction takes such a big hit. And experiencing that, I'm not saying run away from that experience it, and then come back to, okay, what's the one thing that I can do to move forward? And then distancing yourself from what's happening in the environment. What's happening in the environment is not a reflection on your own individual capabilities. And and for that, all of this to happen, you have to be constantly self-aware. You have to be in touch with your emotions, feelings, and the somatic side of, the sensations in your body that you're experiencing, the pace of breathing, the rate, and all of that. And it's not something out there. It doesn't belong only in the world of yoga. It is something that we have to do very intentionally. The more self-aware we become, the stronger we become, because then we are in a position to navigate any of these negative circumstances and experience the pain, acknowledge the pain and the grief that we experience, and then move forward from there.
Yeah. And I like what you just said there too about experience and acknowledge the pain, because it is pain, right? And it is going to trigger us very, again, we're humans, we're emotional beings, and rightfully so, it's going to trigger us because it's not right. Right?
Yes.
But I do think that one of the things that has helped me, and I think is just really helpful in extension to what you said, is this idea of it's not about me, right? If they give me feedback that doesn't align with my authentic self, that's an expression of their values, not mine, right? And to just be on the lookout for where the disconnect may lie in our value system and in what we know to be true for ourselves. And
absolutely,
in certain situations that works, in certain situations it doesn't. And if you're feeling like you're disrespected for who you are, right? It's different if you're given feedback, like you said, about the content of your work. If you're being given constructive feedback about how to grow a skill set, or, how to develop in a particular way, that's actually meaningful and important to your growth. But if you're being told you're not good enough as a human in certain ways, right? Your style isn't good enough, then that's a good indication that they have a different value system than you do, right?
Yeah.
And that is not about you.
Right.
Yeah. My goodness, I could go on and on all day. I feel like this is just anytime you and I talk, I just feel like so energized and inspired, and I'm so grateful to you. So can you tell us a little bit about where we can find you? So anybody who's listening who wants more of you, like I do.
Oh, Kim, thank you so much. That was very gracious of you. And yes, I absolutely enjoy all our conversations, and I learn so much from them. So thank you. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn, and also through my website, NorthStarAtWork.com, all one word, NorthStarAtWork.com. And on LinkedIn, I have a company page and then my own profile. That's where you'll find me most easily.
And if you're listening before March 15th,
oh, yes. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Yes. And in fact, that's how you and I met 2 years ago in the conference. So NorthStar Solutions and Services, we are hosting our 4th annual Future Work Conference. And the 3rd in a row, we are co-hosting it with Sefer LLC. The founder and CEO is Tiffany Castano, who's a mutual friend. And in fact, Kim and I met through Tiffany. So huge shout out to you, Tiffany. And so Tiffany and I have been co-hosting this conference for the last, since 2021. So this is our 3rd year in a row co-hosting it. This year's topic is burnout, which is on everybody's part of everybody's lived experience and on everybody's mind. So we're going to talk about burnout, the silent pandemic, creating sustainable recovery by embracing equity. So the whole idea, it's a half-a-day event happening on March 15th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. New York time, Eastern Standard Time. And we are getting together to talk about the different aspects of burnout, impact of systemic inequities, particularly gender inequity, and what might we as individuals, again, the focus is on individuals, on us. What is it that each of us can do to not only recognize and recover from burnout, but also what are some things that we can do to prevent burnout? So I'll include the registration info and all of that in the show notes. I'll give it to you, Kim. So once again, we'd love for you to join us. And it's a very boutique event. So we're looking to have up to 150 attendees. Our main goal is that you don't come to just listen to everybody talk, that you actually are able to engage not only with the speakers, but also with your fellow attendees and walk away with some meaningful connections that can help you sustain the work even after the conference. So that's our goal with that.
And we will
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. All of that information will definitely be in the show notes. And thank you so much, Meenakshi, for the conversation, for your friendship, for all the amazing work that you're doing. It is always such a pleasure.
Thank you, Kim. Likewise. And I'm so glad I was able to reach a wider audience through you. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.